What mute buttons are made for, sorry.
We get to see people as I come in. Is that how this works? I've never hosted.
Oh, yeah, no worries. I believe that is the case. I was just looking to see,
Give it a few
I-
minutes.
waiting to see if I could see. Oh, there's the attendees. Yep. You can click over and see the attendee list. Did you see where to see that down below? So where it says participants, you can, on your screen, you should see participants, and then you can click the up arrow, and then you can see the attendees on the right.
I think that might be blocked for me because I'm sharing my screen.
Gotcha. Yeah, at least somebody's in there. I think for folks that are in there, I think we're just giving a little bit of time for others to show up. Is that right?
Yep, I think we're going to give it just a few more minutes and then we will begin shortly. Probably start at 3 or 4 after the hour. Alrighty, well, it is 3 after the hour. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Thanks so much everyone for joining us this evening on what is a not so sunny day today. My name is Lauren Cohen and I am the program coordinator with Renew Wisconsin. For those of you who are not familiar, Renew is a renewable advocacy organization. We work on policies, programs, education, and legislation that work to advance renewable energy within the state of Wisconsin. So we work with things like solar power, wind power, renewable fuels, local hydropower, EVs, building electrification, and battery storage. And I think I covered everything there. We also administer the MadiSUN program on behalf of the City of Madison, which you are going to learn a little bit more about by the end of this presentation, hopefully. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and let's get right into it. All right, so we're going to start with a little bit of a rough overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to start off with some general information about how solar works. So how exactly are we able to harness the power of the sun into electricity that we can use to power our homes? Next, we're going to go over why you should install solar, different motivations to install a solar array, why you may choose solar over your current form of energy production. After that, we're going to go into some finance and incentives that are available for solar or for residential solar installations. There have been some really exciting developments over the past year, and we're going to take a look into all of those. Following that, we're going to go over processes and next steps if you're interested in the MadiSUN Group Buy program. After that, we are going to have an example proposal shown by Stanley Minnick. Stanley is with Arch Solar. He is the head of sales operations. Stanley, feel free to jump in at any point in this presentation to correct me if you hear me say anything that is not representative of solar, or if I've missed anything. And then after that, we're going to leave some time at the end for a little bit of a Q&A, but feel free to drop your questions in the chat, or throughout the presentation, feel free to use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Alrighty, so how exactly does solar work? I'm sure you're all familiar with the rudimentary idea behind solar. You know, sun hits the panels and the panels produce energy, but how does that actually work? Well, the technology that is the basis for solar PV has been around for way longer than you may think. What's called the photovoltaic effect, which is the scientific basis for basically the science behind solar panels, was discovered in the late 19th century. And actually the first solar panel ever created was over 100 years ago. And what's really interesting is we still roughly use that design today. Obviously, there have been some technological advancements and there are more components, but the base is still there. So before I knew more about solar, when I would think about solar energy and solar arrays, I imagined that there were tons of moving parts, different cogs that go into a solar system. But as you can see from the pictures that I have on the slide, there aren't a ton of components that make up a solar array. So starting at the very left, we have something that I'm sure we have all seen before. It's our trusty solar panel. Modern solar panels are made up of several layers of materials that work together to convert sunlight into electricity. So some of those layers, you have a frame, you have some tempered glass, and then you typically have 2 layers of silicon in there as well. But how do those layered materials actually produce energy? So when the sunlight hits the solar panels, the PV cells, which if you look at that picture on the left, it's those individual squares in that panel, they absorb the energy and create somewhat of like an electric field. And this field causes a flow of electrons, and that generates what we call a direct current or a DC electrical charge, which we'll cover a little bit more in the next slide. And while it sounds like a little nuanced and complex, the beauty of these solar panels is they do all of this all on their own with little to no maintenance. So assuming that, you know, your system is interconnected, if the sun is shining and you have those panels on your roof, they will be producing energy. Moving from left to right on those images, this electricity then travels to an inverter, which converts that direct current electricity, DC electricity, into what's called an alternating current or AC electricity that can be used in homes. So I have 2 different kinds of inverters shown here. I have a standard inverter, which is that long rectangular one. And then that small little black one is what's called a microinverter. So what microinverters do is they transform the power of individual solar panels into energy. So if you have, let's say, an array that consists of 30 solar panels, you're going to have 30 microinverters, one below each panel. And microinverters are great because they allow you to individually monitor, optimize and upgrade the panels in your system. And on the far right, we have what's called a meter. I'm sure you're familiar with this. The meter tracks your electrical consumption, and they're really handy with the solar PV systems because they can track if you're overproducing, in other words, producing more electricity with the solar system than you are consuming. All right, so to give a little bit of a visual representation of what I just went over, as you can see from this little GIF, so we have the sunlight hitting the solar panels. Those electrons within the panels become excited and produce DC electricity. From there, the inverter will transform that energy into alternating current or AC energy that can be used in your home with your appliances. So what's interesting is the kind of electricity that's produced within the panels is not the kind of electricity that can be utilized within your home. We need that inverter to convert it to AC energy, which is what your home and appliances use. If you take a look at where the meter, which is just to the left of that gray box, you'll notice that the arrows going around it are going both toward the meter and toward the grid. So those are bidirectional. And this means that electricity is flowing both ways. So both from the system to the grid and from the grid to your home. And this is going to bring up the idea of net metering. So what this means is that if you have a grid-tied solar array, which 99.9% of residential solar systems are going to be grid tied. So that's when I say residential solar array, I'm referring to a grid tied system. So when you have a grid tied solar array and your system is producing more electricity than is being consumed, rather than going into your home, the electricity you produce will go out onto the grid. So on the flip side of that, when your solar system may not be producing as much energy as you need to power your home, such as at night or during some bad weather like we've been seeing this week, unfortunately, you are then able to pull electricity from the grid to your home. So with net metering, any excess electricity that a solar system generates and is not used, it's sent back to the grid and credited to the homeowner's account. How exactly the homeowner's is credited depends on the specific utility, but that is generally how it goes. Net metering is really, really great in the sense that it allows you to only pay for the net amount of the electricity that you consume. Our executive director used to use the analogy of net metering being like rollover minutes when talking about net metering, but that was a little bit before my time. So it feels a little disingenuous to give that comparison, but if you're familiar with rollover minutes, I think that is a great analogy.
I just want to pop on and say I'm definitely sharing that with Sam. But another way to think of it, although it's not physically, the grid is not storing your energy, it does store the value of the energy you produced for you during the day for you then to pull off. So I think the comparison is still good with the rollover minutes for those of us that remember what that is.
Thank you for the clarification. I wasn't
That
aware
was
of
great. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so now looking at a different visual of net metering. So right now we're looking at a single day of energy consumption. So this is from a real solar system, and this is the real energy production of that solar system. So when looking at this, the area in red represents the consumption or the consumption from the utility. So the electricity that this resident had to pull from the grid. So as you can see, those were during the hours that the sun was not shining. The green represents solar production, so the amount of electricity that the solar system was producing. So as you can see, that started a little bit around 8 a.m. and dipped off, I would say, around 5 or 6 p.m. And if you take a look at the blue, that represents the homeowner's energy consumption from their own array. So something to pay attention to here is the large area of green that doesn't overlap with that blue shading. So in terms of net metering, this would be excess electricity that is sent to the grid and the homeowner is given a credit for. So if you were to average out that green to cover the whole 24-hour period, that kilowatt hour production represented by the green is enough to offset the homeowner's entire day of electricity consumption. So that's sort of how net metering works from a billing perspective. All right, and then going into what exactly do we consider an optimal home for solar? What is a solar ready home? So the first thing that we are going to talk about is the idea of various aspects of a roof that would make it optimal for solar. So the idea of shading. So an ideal home for solar would ideally be one that has no shading. So from trees, other buildings, or any other, obstacles or objects. Any shade that is cast on your roof will cut into the solar potential of your home. But with that being said, that isn't to say that if you have some shade on your roof, you're not qualified for solar or you don't have a good home for solar. But ultimately, a good rule of thumb is the less shading, the better. The second thing that we want to look at when assessing your home solar viability is the age of your roof. So ideally, when you start your solar journey, you want to start that journey with as new of a roof as possible. This is because if you think about a solar panel's lifespan, which people typically say will be around 25 to 30 years, you want your roof to be able to support those panels throughout that whole lifespan. So if you're starting your solar journey with, let's say, a 20-year-old roof, and you put those solar panels on, your roof probably won't be able to support those solar panels for the full 30-year lifespan. So you won't want to have to, take those panels down, replace the roof, and start over again. So to give some point of reference, if your roof is less than 10 years old, you most likely won't need to replace your roof. If your roof is 20 years old or older, you're likely going to want to replace it before installing solar. And if you're somewhere in between 10 and 20 years, that's a little bit of a gray area where you're going to want to talk to your solar installer specifically and sort of decide on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and if I could just add, another thing we encourage folks to do, every once in a while, we'll get a customer that finds it a little surprising that the solar installer is trying to talk them out of signing a solar contract. And that's usually something we'll do is say, hey, why don't you get a roofer out here, get 2 roofers out here, or 3 of them out, have them give you a free evaluation and proposal. Most of the ones that are reputable and have been around a while aren't going to try to talk you into a roof before it's ready. We happen to have one person on the team that used to own a roofing business, so he's able to give some pretty good concrete input, but a roofing professional isn't always available from Arch, and sometimes getting a third opinion or an objective opinion really helps make that informed decision. And the last little bit is you can pay to have the panels pulled off and reinstalled at a later date, but a lot of times the cost to do that can be fairly significant to the tune of thousands of dollars. So timing that correctly is really important, as you mentioned. So just add a little more detail.
Yeah, thank you. And then the last thing we want to think about in the roof is the roof's orientation. So a south-facing roof is considered optimal for a solar system, but it's by no means a requirement anymore with the technological advancements that we've seen within the solar industry. There's plenty of productive solar arrays that exist on east-west facing roofs. If your roof is north facing, it does make things quite a bit trickier, but south, east, west, those are all good and fine when it comes to installing solar.
Sorry to jump in again. I would just say with north facing, we are very hesitant to ever install anything facing north, with an exception to a building that's slightly askew towards the north, but facing primarily west. There's some contractors who are a little more liberally will put the panels to the north, but I find if you look at the modeling and the software, it's typically it's an interesting decision at best, and we discourage people from doing that.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, absolutely. South face is preferable. East west is okay. North is solar may not be the best option for your home, but there are tons of other things that you can do to increase your energy efficiency. Speaking of energy efficiency, that is another thing that you'd want to consider when it comes to your home. So a solar ready home ideally would have some measures taken that make it already at least somewhat energy efficient. This is because you don't want the energy production of your solar array to go toward energy uses that are preventable. So this is things in terms like inefficient or out-of-date appliances. So taking some time to do a little bit of an energy audit around your house and looking for ways where you can bump that energy efficiency and make those upgrades can maybe even make as big of an impact as, reducing the size and cost of your solar panel system that you need to power your home. Moving forward. So that's sort of things about, how solar works and, what goes into installing solar. So moving on to reasons or motivations to install solar. There's a lot of reasons to install solar, and many of them are really individualized. But we're going to cover some general motivations for installing solar in Wisconsin. So the first thing I wanted to touch on today is the reliability of solar. So looking at a solar panel, I feel like it's pretty easy to underestimate its ability to hold its own in terms of a lifespan and its durability and things like inclement weather. But these panels are really great at doing what they're made to do. Most panels, they are under a 25-year warranty, but the lifespan will oftentimes outlive that warranty. I would say that solar panels could a lot of times have a 30 to even maybe 40-year lifespan. And solar panels have a less than 1% degradation rate, meaning that at the end of your solar system's lifespan, so at that 30-year mark, your panels will still be producing fairly close to its original capacity, which I think is very interesting as well. When we think about solar reliability in terms of weather, I feel like another big misconception about solar panels is their ability to perform on days when it's not completely sunny. So in terms of production on these suboptimal days, when the sun's not out, when it's overcast, these systems still can produce energy. They won't be at their maximum output, and they might not necessarily be able to offset your consumption for the day, but they still have the ability to produce electricity. Another thing is solar panels are very, very durable. They're made out of very durable materials. So they can withstand golf ball size hail, as well as winds of up to 140 miles an hour. One thing that I do want to talk about is a solar system's performance, specifically in the winter and specifically when it snows. So living in Wisconsin, I'm sure that this is something that's on the forefront of everyone's mind. When you think about a Wisconsin winter and a snowfall that comes along with that, oftentimes a big amount of snow will stick on the ground, especially if it's pretty cold, and it can stay there for a while, anywhere from days to weeks. And in instances like this, the snow will tend to stick to the solar panels too. And in that period where the snow is stuck to those solar panels, the solar production will essentially stop. There is a slight upside though, which is due to the dark coloring of the solar panels. Oftentimes these panels are black or a dark blue. And with the pitch of the roof that they're placed on, the snow does tend to maybe slide off or melt a little bit quicker than it would on other surfaces. Another great reason to install solar panels is that solar panels increase the value of your home. So solar homes will typically sell faster and for more money than similar homes without solar power. There have been quite a few studies to support this idea, including one from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It was done a few years back, and they found that the value of your home increases by $20 for every $1 saved on your utility bill. So I think that's a pretty neat little fact to keep in the back of your mind. And the reason for that is exactly that, financial perspective. If you're looking to buy a new home and you're looking at, two similar homes of a similar price, a similar size, but one has solar panels and the other does not, most people will be drawn to the home with the solar panels simply due to the lower utility bills. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of motivations to install solar is that solar is affordable. As this graph shows by this little yellow line, the cost to install solar has decreased by around 50% over the last decade. The amount of solar installed over the last 10 years has absolutely skyrocketed. And with this increase, the cost has been able to come down quite significantly. You'll notice the price has slightly increased over the past couple of years, but as has the cost of plenty of other things. But overall, there's a significant downward trend in the cost of installing solar.
Could I add just a little more context on this chart as well?
Mhm.
This is factoring in a lot of utility scale solar. So when you see those prices, just realize that they're averaging all of the solar. It's a blended average of very large systems and very small systems. So just to keep that in mind for folks as they examine pricing for like a residential array.
And then another graph that I think is a pretty good visual is if you look at that, this demonstrates the difference between the hard and soft costs of solar. So I feel like a lot of the times when people think about the costs associated with solar, at least I used to think about this prior to learning more about it, I assumed that the brunt of the cost would come from things like the material and the hardware costs. So the panels, the inverters, all of that. But actually, in reality, the majority of the cost is going to come from soft costs. And so when I say soft costs, I mean things like installation labor or permitting or interconnection and things like that. You may also see that that hardware costs have gone up a little bit slightly as well, but they've remained fairly stable in the last few years. But all this is to say that while solar is absolutely not inexpensive by any means, over recent years, the costs of solar have drastically dropped. And when you think about all the different financial incentives that are currently available to homeowners, it really is a great time to install solar. And that brings us to our next topic, which is economics and incentives. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about the different rebates, incentives that are available to homeowners who install a residential solar system, as well as get a little bit into the nitty-gritty details about how much these systems tend to cost. So the first financial incentive that I wanted to talk about is from the Focus on Energy program. So if anyone's unfamiliar, Focus on Energy is a program with the goal of installing cost-effective energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And one of the ways that they reach this goal is through a residential rebate. So Focus on Energy offers a flat $500 rebate for homeowners in Wisconsin who install solar, assuming that they're part of one of the participating utilities. There are certain qualifications that the solar array needs to meet. For instance, the system needs to be installed within 135 degrees of due south, and that pretty much means anything except for north. And then the tilt of the roof must be 50 degrees or less, and then the roof can't be more than 15% shaded. There is also a possible $500 adder if your home is within certain rural zip codes. And if you're curious about if your home falls within that, the Focus on Energy website has a link where you can check out the eligible zip codes for that additional $500. All right, another really exciting thing that I want to talk about is the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm sure we've all heard of the IRA before. The Inflation Reduction Act is arguably, I would say, one of the most positive and instrumental pieces of renewable energy legislation that we've seen. And within it, there's a really great incentive for homeowners to install solar. So the IRA has something in it called the Solar Investment Tax Credit. And this is a tax credit of 30% of the total cost of your system. And what's great about this tax credit is that it can be carried over. So if your tax appetite is perhaps not large enough the year that you apply for the solar investment tax credit, it can be carried over into the following tax year. And I think it can continue to be carried over, I want to say, for 10 years up until when it starts ramping down. So as you can see, that 30% is going to remain consistent for around the next 10 years. And then in 2033, it's going to start ramping down to 26 and then 22, and then it's going to drop off in 2035. All right, so now that we've gone over the available rebates and incentives to residential solar installations, I wanted to go over a bit of a hypothetical scenario of what a system may cost. It's important to know with this little experiment that this is not by any means going to look like what your proposal that you're going to receive is. Your system is going to be entirely tailored to your home, and that's going to depend on things like your own energy usage and a ton of other factors. But I just want to give a little bit of a rough idea about what to expect and just how much these rebates and incentives help shave off that cost of installing a solar system. So for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going based off of a 6 kilowatt residential solar system, and I'm saying that that is going to cost $18,000. Now, this isn't to say that if you have a 6 kilowatt system, you're going to be paying $18,000. It may be more, it may be less, but I figured it was somewhat of a good ballpark figure for that size of a system. So the first thing we're going to tack off is going to be that Focus on Energy rebate. So that takes up $500 of that cost. Then we're going to add in that 30% solar investment tax credit. So 30% of $1,800 is going to be $5,400. And then your out-of-pocket cost for that 6 kilowatt system is going to be $12,100. So again, this is a completely hypothetical scenario just to give a rough idea of the price of installing a solar system. So even though tax credits and rebates do shave off a significant portion of the cost of installing a solar system, and while that number at the bottom is a lot more digestible, that 12 grand figure is by no means inexpensive. So I wanted to talk a little bit about solar financing options that MadiSUN offers and partners with. Okay, so the first organization that I wanted to talk a little bit about is Green Penny. So Green Penny is a virtual bank that offers renewable energy project financing. This project will finance up to 100% of your solar system with no money down, and you'll have a fixed interest rate over the time that it takes for you to pay off your system. Another organization that we partner with is called Clean Energy Credit Union. Clean Energy Credit Union is a nonprofit committed to helping individuals afford clean energy through financing options. And they offer a similar system to Green Penny. There's going to be no fixed interest rates, and they have combined loans of up to $90,000. And the interest rates for these start at around 7.5%. So if either of these are intriguing to you at all and you want to learn more, please feel free to email me after this presentation, and I'd be happy to discuss them in more detail with you. All right, so moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about returns on investment and payback periods. So calculating a return on investment for a solar system is surprisingly easy nowadays, given the technological advancements that we have for monitoring our solar systems. You can see the kilowatt hour energy production pretty much to the decimal point within your systems. So if we take a look at two common utilities in Madison, MG&E and Alliant, which I'm sure a lot of you fall within, in MG&E, you're paying a little over 16 cents per kilowatt hour. And with Alliant, you're paying a little over 13 cents. So going back to the hypothetical that we talked about earlier with that 6 kilowatt system, with that system, you'll be having around an annual energy savings of 1,000 with Alliant or 1,200 with MG&E. And this could depend. You may fall in other utilities that may be municipal utilities, and that rate might be a little bit smaller. So we use these utility rates to calculate your return on investment. So if we do a simple calculation, and that's based off of things like the size of your array, its annual kilowatt hour production, and the rate of your utility, we can figure out a return on investment. So going back again to that earlier 6 kilowatt example, if we were to average about $1,200 per year, assuming you're in MG&E territory, it's going to take around 10 years for you to pay off the cost of that solar system. And this number is really dependent on a number of factors, including your individualized energy use within your home, as well as things like weather and a ton of other factors. But I would say anywhere between 10 to 12 years is a good estimate for a payback period. Again, if you're in some other utilities like municipal utilities, that could go up to somewhere like 15 years. But even with a 15-year payback period, if you're thinking about a solar system's lifespan of 30 years, you're still going to have 15 years outside of that payback period where you're independently producing your own electricity. All right, and then the next thing we're going to talk about is extras. So I'm going to refer a little bit to our expert here, Stanley, but I can kick it off a little bit. So as we're seeing more tech advancements, and the solars are starting to incorporate things like electric vehicle charging and battery storage. And if you do choose to include these within your solar installation, this is obviously going to impact the cost of your solar system. So for instance, with things like an EV charger, including the upfront cost of installing the EV charger, you may need a slightly larger system to accommodate for that increased energy usage. And then battery storage is a whole nother story that has quite a large upfront cost in installing as well.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing up these topics. So I'll start on the EV charger, just to mention that the charger itself is something that really, is fine to install at the same time as a solar array, but it's not required. So if you had an EV and you were anxious to get that thing charged with a level 2 charger as quickly as possible, most run-of-the-mill kind of standard electricians are going to be able to wire up an outlet in your garage for you that would provide 240-volt power that you're going to need to more quickly charge an EV. So that's the first thing. We're happy to provide a price for that alongside the solar proposal, but it's also something that we would understand if someone chose to go with a smaller shop that could get it done maybe a little bit less expensively, frankly, or a little more quickly in other cases. As far as the other element that you mentioned with the addition of electric vehicles is the increased kilowatt hour consumption. So it's a good thing to mention, largely because if you're going to add an EV in the next 1 or 2 years and it's a foregone conclusion, and you know roughly how many miles you travel a year, and you know whether or not you're going to want like the F-150 Lightning giant SUV with a battery big enough to power your house for weeks, or if you're going to want like a Nissan Leaf, right? Those two vehicles have very different batteries. They have different power requirements and weight and everything else. So they're going to have very different needs in terms of kilowatt hour consumption. If you were to look at more of a typical vehicle like a Chevy Bolt, which is with a B, the little hatchback car that we happen to drive in our family, I drive a lot of miles for work, so I'm kind of an exception. But if you were to drive around 10,000 to 11,000 miles with that vehicle, you'd be looking at around 3,000 kilowatt hours a year if you charged at home exclusively. So what we like to do with people when we meet with them is say, are you planning to add the EV, or is there also a chance that you might add an electric hot water heater, a heat pump water heater, or geothermal? And we try to get a sense for what your future consumption is going to be. Not that we want to oversell you, but that if you're looking at a system that's 12 panels and you go up to 16 now, you're going to get a much better deal than if you add 12 and then come back 3 or 4 years later or 2 years later just to get 4 more panels added. So that's why we go through that exercise with people. And I just want to maybe prep the folks that are on the call for that. There will be a lot of questions about not just what you use now, but what you might use in the future. And the other piece with the batteries, we are happy to install batteries alongside solar. There's a lot of considerations. The big one I want to point out is due to the way net metering works, and you did such a great job explaining it, there's not a huge financial incentive for most people in Wisconsin to install a battery. And this is, we obviously make money selling batteries. We sell more than twice as many this year as we did the year before, but we do that in a way that really focuses on their core benefit in this market, which is battery backup during the occasional grid outage. I've got a handful of customers that are west of town in particular. They're at the end of a line. They have pretty frequent outages of 1, 2, 3 hours. For those folks, investing the $20,000-$30,000 on top of the solar array price, for them, it's something that that they're willing to consider, and many of them do it. But if you see Facebook ads from companies that will remain nameless in this meeting at least, promising you that you're going to save tons of money with a battery, I would ask them to see some of the assumptions they're using, because if you do the math, you can't save enough money with a battery given Wisconsin rates today to pay for it. You might save more money than you would have without it, but it's a question of, with solar, you're paying off in 10, 12, 13 years. With a battery, you could use it the whole life and not see enough financial incentive with today's Wisconsin situation with the battery. So hopefully I didn't go too over the top with I don't want to sound anti-battery. They're amazing. We love them, but we just want people to understand what they're getting. And another element of that should be mentioned, that we mentioned in our proposals, is without a battery, a typical solar array does not provide backup power during a grid outage. And that's a safety feature for the line, the folks repairing the line if there is an outage. It's also, one kind of counterintuitive thing that people oftentimes are surprised by. So if you're looking at solar as a source of backup, there are some really rare exceptions, but in most cases, you're pairing that with a fairly costly battery as well. And I'd be happy to address any questions about batteries or chargers or cars if you thought that was good, or if anyone on the call had them, but hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things to consider when you want to consider adding these extra things, whether it be an EV charger or a battery. And that's always important to talk to your installer about. Alrighty, so the next thing we're going to get into is talking about the group buy specifically. So what are the benefits of joining a group buy rather than just going directly to an installer yourself and getting a quote? So I would say one of the biggest advantages of joining a group buy is that we MadiSUN makes the process really, really simple. So we put you into contact with experienced, reputable installers with proven track records like Arch Solar, who are intimately familiar with the residential solar process, with permitting and all of that stuff. So we take out that step of you having to track all of those firms down, which is really great. Another great thing about a group buy is it uses that collective buying power of homeowners to get you a slight a price break in the cost of installing solar as well. And usually that exists somewhere around 5% of this group buy. And then lastly, something that MadiSUN offers that you wouldn't be able to get if you were to just independently go to an installer on your own is that added aspect of customer service. So if for whatever reason you have any questions about any part of the process, you can absolutely contact us, give one of us a call, an email, and we'd be happy to talk you through it. So overall, MadiSUN and group buys in general just make the process of solar going, it just makes it a lot easier. And then just to cover a little bit of MadiSUN's history specifically, since our group buy started in 2016, we've helped 289 homeowners go solar. Last year, we helped 64 homeowners. That was our biggest year yet. And that is an aggregate capacity over those 6 years of around 1,600 kilowatts. So if after this you're wondering, okay, what's the process and what are the next steps? So the first thing that you're going to want to do is sign the I'm interested form. I'm sure a lot of you on this call have already taken that first step. Following the I'm interested form, that inquiry form, you can expect to get a phone call from Arch Solar. And from there, they'll talk to you about, the process of going solar, just some rudimentary basics about, what you can expect from that process. And from there, you'll have a site assessment scheduled where they will assess your roof, your electrical panel, your solar potential, and all of that kind of stuff. And then from that point forward, you may receive a proposal, which includes the specific type of system, the size of the system, the layout of the array on your house. So you use some really high-tech software to figure out all of this stuff, exactly how it's going to look on your home. As well as some pretty detailed cost and rebate analysis. And from there, you'll get a contract issued, and then hopefully your solar array will be installed. Throughout this process, it's always a good idea to, get quotes from multiple installers. It never hurts to be too thorough, is something that I want to throw out there as well. And now at this point, I am going to pass the baton over to Stanley. He's going to go through just an example proposal so you can kind of see what this process is going to look like.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Just if you'll just give me one moment to pull that up. And I did get a comment, Cynthia. I just want to look over your project and make sure there wasn't any data entry errors or something like that, because 22.7 year payback is longer than what we usually see for solar only. One question would be whether or not you had batteries included in that, but again, I'll try to follow up with you or have Michael follow up with you on that. But for now, I want to show more of a generic example proposal. And for some folks who reach out to us and who say, hey, I'm curious and interested in solar, but I'm not getting a new roof till next year. I'm not going to be interested for a little while, what have you. We will sometimes share one of these example proposals with you. They're not meant to be the final be all end all, just more of a example. And in this case, we'll go through one of those as a way to prepare you for your more of a custom proposal to your situation. So forgive me, because now, of course, can you see my screen yet?
It popped up for a second and then it disappeared.
Sorry, just give me one moment. So when we do put these together, we're going to be requesting 12 months of kilowatt hour consumption information so that we can tailor that to exactly what your situation is. And then we'll also discuss with you any changes, like I mentioned, to your consumption that might be coming in the future. So thank you for your patience while I sorted through technology trouble. One of the problems with saying you're good with technology is that it always tests you. So Can everyone see can you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So this is just the first page, in addition to a nice picture of some really friendly folks west of town. You can see there's, an example of a system behind, and a little bit about Arch. This is our 20th year in business. I mean, I will reiterate, it's very true that everybody should get multiple proposals. We're not the right fit for everybody. I think we're the right fit for a lot of people. I think we can offer a lot of options and have services that are wonderful, but there's a lot of great options out there, and we're happy to compete with reputable folks, and occasionally we're even willing to accept that we're not going to install every project that we come across. So there's definitely some good advice beyond just getting the multiple proposals in terms of questions you can ask. There's lots of info online if you're interested in kind of getting some guidance there. This page is a page that's going to show, your house. There will be a little bit of a 3D model that is actually generated of your house, provided that you go forward with the request for a proposal. You can see the coloration on the roof indicates the available sun. And that's, part of why we were talking about not installing on the north face of the roof earlier. It also goes through the upfront costs, the focus on energy rebates, and the federal tax credit. One thing to note is that typically you would net out your focus on energy credit before you determine your federal tax credit. Also, neither Arch or Renew, I think, provide tax advice. So your tax situation, if you're not sure how it's going to impact you, and you don't feel like the guidance we've given you is quite clear enough for your situation, I mean, it's worth taking a minute to find out, hey, I'm in XYZ situation, so my taxable income's way low. It might take me years to get all of this value back. Those are things that are going to come down to your situation more than just where the tax credit rules are. So then another thing we spell out for you is the discount associated with the group buy. That is already reflected in the price. So basically, if you were to work with Arch on this specific equipment, which is the most premium panel we have, the REC panel, you'd be at about $22,000 if you weren't going with the tax credit in this case. We break out what your monthly payment would be with the Green Penny loan, and we give you things like the cost per watt in case you are trying to do an apples to apples comparison or an apples to oranges comparison, frankly, with a proposal that has different equipment in it. A lot of times, if you just figure out what the cost per the total watts of the system size, that's your best way to evaluate the cost. Yeah, your lifetime savings estimates, lifetime productions estimates, year one savings, and all of that will be listed as well. If you had trees to the south here that shaded the array, the software we use is going to factor that in as well. It uses advanced LiDAR imagery where available, and then we can actually do a pretty good job of modeling that. In fact, good enough that the state of California and other clean energy incentive programs accept the shading analysis done by this software for their procedures. The next page, you'll get a breakdown on the consumption versus production. You can see a couple of the months, like if you look at May, there is some excess over what the consumption is estimated to be. It actually comes down to your import versus your export when it comes time to figuring out, how your energy is going to be credited. I don't want to go too into the weeds on that, but if you're speaking with us or another reputable contractor familiar with MG&E's policy versus Alliance, they'll be able to walk you through exactly what those differences are. MG&E is a bit more favorable in most regards. So Alliant is still very, the payback is usually maybe 1 year longer or something like that. But there's changes they've made recently to their rates that have been beneficial for the payback of solar as well. You'll also see your annual breakdown. Obviously, these are estimates. Your consumption is going to vary year to year. Your production is going to vary some year to year as well. We restate, your annual electric cost before solar and after solar, both on a 25-year and a first-year basis. We go over, again, annual average monthly savings. Obviously, the production of your system varies throughout the year, and so therefore your savings will as well. You then have this page here, breaks down a cash flow option for you for if you were to finance yourself or pay cash. That's the option up top. And then if you were to finance through Green Penny, this is what you'd be seeing in that scenario. So Green Penny, you touched on a little bit ago. It's a bank out of Iowa. They specialize in solar loans. This is not one of your low interest financing deals where, there are some contractors who really specialize in that, frankly, where they basically offer you a higher price. And in exchange for that, you get a much lower interest rate. That's not our default approach, but it is out there, just something to compare. In this case, the customer would have expected maybe about $120 loan payment. That's obviously, they would get that, they would apply with Green Penny with the bank and get those details directly from them at the time. The proposal also has a little bit about Arch, as well as some of the environmental attributes of your project. And then probably my favorite page is the assumptions page, not just because it has a cute picture of my daughter in my house, although that's part of it. It's also because I think a lot of these assumptions are missing from a lot of proposals that occasionally I will admit that customers have sent me competitors' proposals and I may have glanced at them. They may have had them sitting on the desk when I showed up, and some of them do a great job of explaining the details, and some of them really leave a lot of things out. The ones that I'll call your attention to, the utility escalation rate is a big one. And then the module degradation, and then asking if they factor in anything for snow loss. So the utility escalation rate is how quickly the savings models factor in or expect and model increases in the rate per kilowatt hour that you pay from the utility. So right now, this one is showing at 2.5%. There's plenty of people that use 3.5%. Some pretty reputable folks out there use 3.5%. I've seen some folks that were a little more aggressive have that cranked up to 5 or 6%. And if you have that rate doubling or increasing at a rate that's twice what is reality, the savings and all the payback numbers are going to look tremendous. But that's just because somebody adjusted that lever till it looks good. So just the assumptions asking about the utility escalation rate that was used, just because someone uses one that's higher than what we've got listed here isn't necessarily a bad sign, but just to understand what their thinking is and what they used. The module degradation relates to how quickly the panels will degrade over time. We're going to be offering 2 panels through the group buy, the REC panel, which is more of a premium panel, and then a Silfab panel, which is a North American made panel that looks really nice, but it has a higher degradation rate. So you have an all premium panel that degrades half as quickly as the standard panel. And then you have a standard panel that degrades more quickly. Just knowing what that figure is for your panels is helpful. And then the snow losses, we have about 3 to 6% factored in, depending on the project, to try to minimize. So our production figures might come in a little bit lower from time to time. And that's because we'd rather kind of under deliver and over promise later there. So yeah, the other piece that you'll get is just a little brief example. If you're interested in the batteries, you can see $19,000 to $40,000 if you want a massive battery array. So just something that for some people, they don't even want to see these pages, but we just give them to people so they can learn a little more. And you can see we try to make this. I got a little feedback from one of the battery manufacturers that I shouldn't list that due to Wisconsin rate structures incentive, there's no clear financial benefit to battery storage. One of the battery manufacturers took issue with documenting that in the proposal, and that was all the more reason I wanted to keep it in there, because it's the truth. And if you buy a battery and you do it to save money, you're either really good at manipulating your rates and your usage, or you've got some information that I just don't have after 12 years in this industry. So just be leery of someone that tries to sell you a battery based on the financial benefits alone in Wisconsin right now. Hopefully in 5 years that won't be the case. But so that's the example proposal. Hopefully I didn't go on too long. I tend to ramble.
No, not at all. I think that was really good information. I think it's really helpful to see one of those example proposals, see all the kind of information that you're going to be provided with when you reach out to the installer. So without anything else, we're going to open it up for questions. I'm going to put my screen back up so you can have our emails. Oh, just kidding. Maybe I won't. Let's see. Let's try this. There we go. All right. So I saw a question come in from Shannon. Her question is, at the end of solar panels lifespan, how are they disposed of? Are they recyclable or are they considered a hazardous material? So I can take that first, Stanley, if you want to add anything to it. To my understanding,
Yeah, definitely. Yep, go ahead.
I was going to say, to my understanding, there are components within a solar panel that are recyclable. So these can kind of be, pieced apart. And so you have your aluminum frames. Usually there's glass in it. And those are all really recyclable materials. There may be smaller individual components that aren't necessarily recyclable, but I don't think that they're processed in a way that would be considered a hazardous material.
I would say that there are, in some cases, some lead and other materials that obviously aren't that great. One of the module options that we are offering, the REC Alpha Pure, it has a lead-free certification that they're really proud of, and that's part of why they come with a premium. And they actually also carry a recycling certificate that I forget which European standard acronym it is, but if you were to inquire with your energy consultant with the REC panels, they can go into more detail with you about the lead-free and recycling certifications.
Yeah. And I have heard of, I don't know how frequently this is done, but given a panel's degradation rate and that they're typically on a roof for 30 years, I mean, those are being taken off of your roof at, I would say, somewhere around like 70% capacity. So in theory, they could theoretically be repurposed for some other.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed that surprised me, like I mentioned, being around since like I don't know, it's 2015, 14, 13 range. Like some of those projects that were installed then, I would have never expected it, but people have actually come back and asked us to put newer panels on. Part of that is because the technology changed with, like you mentioned, the microinverters. There's a safety benefit to microinverters that is now required. So if you have an outdated old system, and some of you on the call, maybe you do have an old outdated system, when you touch that old system, a lot of times you have to upgrade it. So there are cases where folks are 10 years in and they decide they're going to do something, a major remodel. Maybe they end up, like you mentioned, pulling those panels off and deciding to get new ones at the time. And then there's this secondhand market out there that you'll find people with a cabin or hobbyists that will sometimes pick those up at a really discounted price for you. So there can be second lives. At Arch, we actually make tables out of them. We have a handful of tables at each of our offices primarily from old modules that aren't being used anymore. So not a sustainable solution for all of the volume of panels out there. That's too many tables, but something we like to do for fun.
I've seen the panels. They're pretty cool looking for sure. Any other questions that anyone has?
see, did I miss any? Yeah, and, very good.
All right, well, we are rounding out on the hour now. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. If you have any follow-up questions or anything about the presentation, about MadiSUN, about residential solar in general, please feel free to shoot myself, Stanley, or Stanley's colleague, Sam, an email. I have our emails listed on this last slide right here. But otherwise, thanks so much for taking the time tonight to learn a little bit more about solar. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good rest of your night.
Have a good one. Bye.